myself sorted here. Morena. I was actually going to say Morena Solway School, but no, it's not Solway School. Morena Church. So I've just given it away. I'm principal at Solway Primary down the road there. So Mark Bridges, I'm a teacher. My beautiful wife Juliet, who is a teacher also. We've been here for coming up to 5 years now. Juliet actually trained as a environmental scientist and then was children's pastor back in Auckland and has retrained as a teacher since we've been down here. So very proud of you, Juliet. You're sticking with it, so that's good. And it's a bit wicked of me, but sometimes I'm like, now you know what I felt like all these years when I'd come home and I'd be a bit grumpy, or I'd have some kid who's done something crazy in class. And being a bloke, I used to always get those ones who are a bit crazy. Do you know how I feel, Paul? Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so I'm Mark. I was actually born in Lower Hutt. My dad was pastor at Apuni Baptist back in the 1960s and probably early 70s. Then he was senior pastor at Te Atatu Baptist in West Auckland, big spirit-filled Baptist church in Auckland up until he retired in the 90s. So I'm number 5 out of 6 kids and been teaching now for, I don't know, a long time. Yeah. More than 25 years now, taught all over the world, and also served as a soldier in the British Army for a while as well. So you have a pretty diverse background. Do you like my t-shirt, my hoodie? Straight out of Whakaoriori. And now the best thing about this, it was free. So this was for a principals conference we had a little while ago, and I have a real love of free things. So I don't know, it's something to do with my ancestry. I don't know if it's my Māori ancestry or it's my Jewish ancestry, possibly a bit of both. But anyway, and I actually had a really cool experience with some free stuff in Christchurch a while ago. I was actually at another conference and ran into my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law's an MP, and said, "Oh, look, when are you heading to the airport, Simon?" And he goes, I think I'm probably about 2 o'clock. It was didn't quite fit in with me, but I thought I'll get a free ride with you. So I went with him in his corporate cab to the airport, and then he goes, "Oh, you've got a bit of a wait here, haven't you?" I said, "You want to come to the Coral Lounge with me?" It's like, the Coral Lounge. It's like, I've never been to a Coral Lounge before. So anyway, so I went with my brother-in-law, and he met up with a whole lot of other of his mates who I knew as well, into the Coral Lounge, and everything's free. Like everything's free, and like there's all this food. It's like you don't have to pay for it, and you just help yourself to Cokes and this, that, and the other thing. Anyway, I was really excited about this. So as soon as I think I got back from the flight, I rung Juliet. I said, "You'll never guess what? I went to the Coral Lounge, and everything was free." She goes, "You've had membership for the Coral Lounge for years. It's on our credit cards." And it's like, no one ever told me. I could have been doing this for years. But often I think our Christian walk is so much like this too. We actually have all these, facilities that we can tap into, but we never do. Our credit card just sits in our pocket, and actually we don't tap into even an inch of the power that we actually can tap into. So, so there's your Coral Lounge parable for today. And so I don't know if I will go, because it's not good for me, especially when Ed'll probably know, once you've been to one of these conferences too. So actually, same conference. So they're trying to sell everything to the principals, so there's freebies everywhere. So I probably got about 80 pens. The girls got, so nothing's worth more than about $3, but I got so much stuff. It was crazy. Anyway, I'll just open in prayer and then I'll start with the message. The message today is actually based around my favourite biblical story, but I'll get into that in a minute. Lord, I just really ask for your anointing on the service today. Lord, I ask for you just to guide my mouth, Lord, that I only say the things that you want me to say, Lord. And I just pray that hearts will be open, Lord, and I'll speak to the situation and people's lives, Lord, and they'll be able to go away today, Lord, empowered, Lord, to take on those giants that they need to take on in their realms, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. So the message today is called Facing Your Giants. And there are all sorts of giants in life, but my favourite story of the Bible is probably, definitely in the top 5, is the story of David and Goliath. I am Mark David Bridges. I have one and only one uncle, who was my Uncle David, and I think it's something about a little boy taking on a big guy. Since I've got older brothers and a whole lot of older cousins, they were always a lot bigger than me, and I was always the little guy, and this little guy taking on this huge giant is something really inspirational. And it's a story that tells us that little guys can do big things. So, David faces his giant, 1 Samuel 17:18 to 11. David was too young to join Saul's army and fight alongside his brothers, so he stayed back to help his father with the sheep. One day, David's father, Jesse, sent him to the battlefield to bring his brothers provisions and check their welfare. When David heard Goliath mocking the God of Israel, he was outraged. David asked the soldiers nearby, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" 1 Samuel 17 to 26. "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. "I'll fight him." I'm just sticking to the bits that are really key to the story. "I'll fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." But David persisted. "I've taken care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I'll catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears. I'll do it again to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Finally, Saul consented. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." So David, little boy, he was, 12, 13, 12, I think at the time, he wanted to take on this Philistine. His eldest brother was a general in Saul's army, but, it wasn't for the older brother. It was this little boy. He was the only one who'd come forward. Goliath had challenged God's people. "Who's going to fight me?" And of all the people, a 12-year-old is the one that God's anointed. And there's some of my soldiering, I'll actually tell you about that a little bit later, on why it's just sort of a revelation that's come to me today, why it wasn't actually David that killed this giant, it was God that killed the giant, but he needed a 12-year-old to do it. And there's actually some science behind that. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't go in with these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from the stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. And I'm going to come back to those 5 smooth stones. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out towards David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come to me with a stick?" He cursed David by the names of his gods. Now you've got to remember, Goliath was over 9 feet tall. So that's pretty tall. We've got a friend, haven't we, Jules Stretch, who's 6'10". I look really small next to someone, I'm 6'1", okay, next to Stretch, who's 6'10". So Goliath was another couple of feet, almost a meter on top of that again. Big guy. David replied to the Philistine, "You come at me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give you the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel, and everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, not with a sword or spear. This is the Lord's battle. he will give you to us. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. He ran out to meet him and reached into his shepherd's bag, taking a stone. He hurled it with his sling, and it hit the Philistine's forehead. The stone sank in. So think about the force that would have had sinking in to his forehead. Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. Anyone who watches The Walking Dead knows once you cut their head off, they don't come back again. Okay, so even back in those times, you don't come back once the head has been removed. Are you facing a serious battle with a formidable opponent like Goliath? Are you feeling small, weak, and useless? Do you know that just like David, there are 5 stones that you can use to defeat the giant in your life? So I'm going to dwell on these 5 stones. So David, and it's interesting because I watched a couple of, on YouTube you can learn everything, but I watched a few clips on these slings, and I had a slingshot when I was younger, and I was pretty good with it too, pretty accurate, but that was one with rubber, and there's no way that that would kill a giant. And so I did a bit of research into these slings that David would have used. So these slings, you'd twirl it around your head or do a figure 8 motion, and there'd usually be about the width, there'd be about the span of one ends of one fingers to the span on the other finger. When they'd let go, it'd make a cracking noise. That crack meant that the sling was actually breaking the sound barrier. So if you do any hunting, that's over 1,200 feet per second. So it's breaking the sound barrier. There's a reason here to choose 5 smooth stones, because if you want to be accurate, you want those stones to be as consistent as possible and fly through the air as consistently as possible. So when he had that sling and he was twirling it around, let it go, if he was skilled with a slingshot, that stone there would have been traveling when it left the sling at about the speed of sound. The thing is, though, because it would have been a stone and how it would have been shaped, it would have slowed down really, really quickly. The only way, I was just thinking about, the only way you'd get close enough to a giant like that was if he wasn't afraid of you and he let you get that close to you. Because for him to kill him with the stone, he would have had to have been, I reckon, within about 50 or 60 feet. Anyone else who was intimidating, he had a spear and stuff, he would have taken them out a long time ago. Only a little boy would have probably have been, unthreatening enough to actually be allowed to be that close. That wasn't a strategy of David. That was a strategy of God. God used David to fulfill the strategy he already had. So that stone, that smooth little stone, when he threw that, that would have been probably the equivalent to maybe a black powder rifle or probably a handgun from 150 years ago. That would have been traveling, I reckon, about 800 feet per second, for that first 50 feet or so. So quite possible Goliath could have been killed instantly for that. He then goes and finishes the deed. So he chose 5 stones. I'm going to dwell on those 5 stones. Why did he choose 5 stones? A number of reasons. I'll come into that a little bit later. A lot of people say later on in Samuel, he talks about Goliath actually having 4 brothers. Okay, potentially, once he took Goliath out, were there 4 brothers he also would have had to have taken out. There are still Goliaths roaming the world. A giant is anything that stands between you and God's purpose for you in your life. Could be addiction, debt, poverty, poor health, broken relationships. If we focus on the giants, we stumble. If we focus on God, the giants tumble. We've all had giants in our lives in the past. I'm going to give you 5 points that will help you take on giants in your life. And everybody has giants because we all have things that are blocking us. Stones of the past. The first stone. First thing David did is he jogged his memory. He remembered what he'd done in the past. God had given him the strength to wrestle lions and a strong arm, a bear. Wouldn't he do the same for the giant? I remember the story of Moses. I could never work out how these people were in the desert and they turned away from God and built this gold statue and this idol, when only a few years earlier they'd got across the Nile and God had parted the Red Sea, but they seem to have forgotten all about that, and suddenly they're happy to fall into idolatry. In our own lives, we forget far too quickly about the miraculous and amazing things that God's done for us. Maybe we haven't physically killed a giant, but I know Juliet and I know that in our own lives, we've got miraculous things. I mean, this is a bit random, but I actually had a miracle happen only about 6 months ago. My wonderful ride-on mower, which I love, and someone just referred this morning that I've probably got the biggest lawn in Masterton. But my wonderful ride-on mower that costs a fortune at Norwoods every time I need to get something done on it, had a belt come off it. And I'm not a mechanic, okay? I'm a teacher. And I'm struggling underneath trying to get this belt on. And it was about an hour I'd been struggling. My fingers are hurt because I get things stuck where they shouldn't be stuck, and battered and bruised. And it was just, it was awful. And I thought, I just don't want to ring Norwoods, because then they're going to have to come out, and then it's going to cost this, that, and the other thing. And it's probably going to be a $500 bill just to put a belt on. And I cried out to God, and it's like I was just struggling so much. Went inside, thought, no, I'm going to go inside, have some lunch, come back and have another go. Came back after having another go, look underneath the ride-on, and everything's in place perfectly. It's all done. This is absolutely true. And I got a bit freaked out and started looking around. Is there someone around? Has Rod come through or something and done it for me? And I, to this day, I don't know what happened, but miraculously this was done. And we've had things like that happen many, many times. I know there's once when I was in Borneo and I had to come back just before we were getting married, and I'd lost my ticket. You didn't have electronic tickets then. It was, and I was looking for hours and hours through my house, and my maid, so over there you have maids, so I think my maid might have thrown it out or something like that, and we'd prayed for it. Juliet prayed for it. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning in Borneo, and I go to my bag, and there it is sitting on top of my bag, and it's like, this is just, but we need to remember those times when God's done things. We've all had them, okay? And even if it's just one or two, we need to write those things down. So those promises that God's fulfilled, those miracles, we need to write those in stone. When it comes to the giants in our life, we write those in sand. Okay, so those things, and all of us have those things. I know Juliet's really keen on prayer journals and actually having those answered prayers. When something happens, that's what we revert to. Look, God, you did it for me this time. You've done it for me that time. Even looking back some of the terrible things that, I've been through some really hard times. I don't talk about some things I've been through, but afterwards I think that's actually prepared me. So people talk about high stress, and potentially a principal's high stress, but actually compared with some other things, it's not that bad. Yeah, so those things prepare you. We need to remember, I know as a soldier, I can still remember Corporal Betts. Something happens, he goes, remember your training, remember your training. We're being trained for this. We need to remember that which we've been through and when God has been faithful, and not forget it. First stone is the past. We need to remember the past. Okay, second stone, the stone of prayer. So before David went, they say that he descended down to get those stones. It doesn't talk about him praying, but we know through David's life, when things went well for David, he was praying. When he stopped praying, things went a bit hairy. Everything that we do, and before we go into combat, before we go and do something that's, that we require, we need to spend time in prayer. We need to spend, even me speaking today, you have to spend time. What do you want me to talk about, Lord? Actually, the truth is that, I was given some ideas about what I could speak about, but I just really felt that this is what I was meant to do today. That word for today in the last couple of days has sort of confirmed that for me as well. So, what do you want me to speak about today? School, when things are a little bit hairy at school, look, who do you want me to employ for this job? What do you want me to do for this? And those of faith will understand, but at school they sort of think I'm this accounting whiz. But what they don't know is often with things, it's just like, Lord, just in faith, I know this is what you want us to do. The money will come in, okay? And it sort of pans out. And I'm not quite that cavalier, but actually when you're a person of prayer, everything we submit to prayer, everything. So when David prayed, things went well. When he walked away, they did not. So we need to remember our past. We need to submit everything in prayer. Third thing is priority. God's reputation. David jealously guarded it. No one was going to defame his Lord. He fought so that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel. And then all the assembly shall know the Lord does not save with the sword and the spear, for the battle is the Lord's. So in 1 Samuel, before David killed the giant, David talked about the Lord 9 times and only twice to the giant. Interestingly, he actually didn't refer to him as a giant. He calls him, in King James, it's the uncircumcised Philistine. And he says that because that means uncircumcised means he's not of God. He is not of God. If he is not of God, then he's against God. Okay, so the uncircumcised Philistine. But he talked about God and referred to God more than 4 times as often as he did the giant. We need to dwell in the Lord, not in the giants of our lives. Okay? So the giants, they're giants because they're bigger than us. But guess what? God is bigger than the giant. Our power does not come from us. It comes from him who we serve. And I can remember many times, in the army, one of our jobs used to be fisheries patrol. And so we'd get dumped on these, I shouldn't say which countries, but usually Taiwanese or Korean or Chinese or something like that, these fishing boats out in the South Atlantic, and we'd have to make an arrest. And it was almost farcical because there'd be 2 or 3 or 4 of us guys, and we'd be put on these boats. And if they wanted to resist us, they could, but they knew it wasn't us, it's those who are behind us. And they knew that there's a Type 23 frigate not that far away, and potentially a British nuclear submarine not that far away, and if we called up, they could have a jet there in probably about 20 minutes. So they weren't afraid of us, they were afraid of those that we represented. We have power behind us. So, we need to be very clear in our priorities. We need to dwell on God, 4 or 5 times more than we do on the giant, okay? Because that giant, David did not see him as a giant. He just saw them as something that was standing in the way of God's purpose for him and his people. Stone number 4, the stone of passion. David ran with passion. So when he went to face Goliath, he didn't slowly, he ran towards him. On the side of the battlefield, Saul and his cowardly army gulped. On the other, Goliath and his skull splitters scoffed. In the middle, the shepherd boy ran on his spindly legs. Okay, so he ran towards him. So we need to be passionate. We need to be spirit-filled. We need to know. We need to actually have some real courage. Okay, even when you do courageous things, it doesn't mean that there's not fear inside. One thing I learned in the armed forces was about, I hate to use the word coward, but being brave, being a coward. And I don't know if there is something called a coward. They're just decisions that people make at any given time. We have the power to make a decision to be brave, okay, or to do something that is cowardly. Now, there's being a coward and there's being sensible, Okay, sometimes it's just sensible, okay, that maybe you need to back off in this particular situation, or maybe this is a battle not worth fighting. But, we need to be people that are passionate, that are full of courage. If we acknowledge the miracles that God's done for us in the past, if we've spent time in prayer, if we'd made it clear that this giant is not of God, okay, because that's one of the things about this uncircumcised Philistine. It is clear, crystal clear, it is not of God. If there is a giant in our life, we need to maybe clarify through prayer, is this of you, Lord? Is this in your plan? But we know by certain things, if it's very clearly not in God's plan, okay, we need to be passionate, we need to be courageous. And last but not least, the stone of persistence. Okay, there's a difference between God saying no to you and God saying not now. Okay, sometimes God says no, sometimes he says not quite yet. Persistence. If we've got a boulder, a giant in our life, we pray, doesn't go away, oh well, that didn't work, I'll try something else. We need to keep going and keep going. One of my teachers noted the kids down at the skateboard park. These little kids down the skateboard park trying these moves. They try the move, they can off, they get back, and they try it again. They might do it 30, 40, 50, 60 times till they get it, but they get there eventually. They're persistent. Why did David have 5 stones? Could be because he had 4 giant brothers, but it could be because if the first one doesn't hit the target, then I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it again until this giant comes down. We need to keep going. We need to persevere. Never give up. I've got my eldest brother's actually coming to our place tomorrow. He's come to stay with his wife. She's got a conference down in Wellington, and I don't know if my brother minds me saying this story or not, but he's not here, so that's fine. But, my brother's really interesting. He went to university, trained, and he ended up working in medical fields and selling medical products. And, he's did very well working for a big, multinational company. And he worked out that, hang on, I get paid so much money a year, and I'm making millions of dollars for these other guys. Why don't I do it for myself? So he decided to go out in business for himself, which takes a lot of courage. Problem was, once he actually went out in business for himself, it didn't kind of work the way that he thought it would work. And he actually found he couldn't even make a living and pay the mortgage and do a few other things, so he had to get some part-time jobs. Had all this degrees, and he did security work. He did just about everything you can imagine, sold cars, did all sorts of extra work on the side just to keep the family afloat. And people said, oh, look, just give up this idea of, having your own business. Why don't you just, go back and get a proper corporate job and, do that again. And he kept at this for years. When I say years, we're talking 13, 14, 15, 16 years. Never really got the breakthrough with his business. And had all these extra jobs and really, really, really struggled. Had a whole lot of other challenges in between. But, 16 years later, actually kind of things started coming together, and then a few more things started coming together. 25 years down the track, has a absolutely thriving business. Lives in the most expensive street in Auckland, which, if you can imagine Auckland streets, that's an expensive street. Has a fleet of cars. I can borrow his Porsche. The problem is, the deal is that you fill it up with petrol afterwards, and it uses a lot of gas. But anyway, so, he's done really, but he stuck with it. He stuck with it for years and years, and people now see all of this stuff. They don't see the stuff that he went through. They don't see the fact that basically he had to go to mum and dad, like, I don't have enough for food this week, things like that. There's a long path that people go through. Professional athletes, the same thing. We've got a family friend who was an Olympic swimmer, and, those 4 a.m. starts every day for years and years and years, and then he misses out on a medal at the Olympics. I think he got 4th in his final at the Olympics, and he misses. It was like the fraction of a fraction of a second. So, but we need to be persistent. We need to keep going. And spiritually, we need to keep going as well. It's heartbreaking when we come against giants. Many people fold. And we see it all the time. If there's a marriage breakup and they just give it all up, that's not the time to give up. That's the time to press in, because we don't know. We don't know the long-term plan. And I know things in my life that were just simply awful things that, I'd been through when I was younger. And now I can honestly say that I'm glad I went through those things, which just about did me in at the time. But I'm glad I went through those, because it's given me a perspective on life that I never would have had previously. It brought me to a place. I think it actually made the man that Juliet needed me to be. So, it's not all about us too. I wish it was, but it's not. It's not all about us. And I know things I've been through, I just know with my staff when they're going through things. And I usually don't talk about stuff, but I can, say, well, actually, I can relate to this because, and they're sort of like, oh, okay, we didn't realize that. And, I can help other people who are in similar situations and things as well. So we need to be persistent. David took 5 stones. He made 5 decisions. Remembered his past, prayed, had his priorities right. He was passionate and he was persistent. The other reason I love David, he's not perfect. He was a superstar when he was 12, but things didn't go perfectly for him. And actually, there's some other stuff. It's like, I don't think I even like this guy anymore. Sometimes I think, well, actually, I'm not as bad as him because I've never done this, that, or the other thing. David didn't have it all together, okay? And but we serve a God of second chances. And it was only just in the last week or so when David fell due to Bathsheba. It was a year before he had any communion with the Lord. It was a year. He spent basically a year away from God. But we serve a God of second chances, and there's no time that we can't come back to Him again. But I would encourage you: there is no giant, and I mean no giant, that is bigger than our God. And David didn't slay Goliath. The Lord slayed Goliath through David. So the past, we are a people of giant killers, from a long line of giant killers. Okay, we're from a long line of giant killers. Prayer. Everything needs to be submitted to prayer. When I spoke Anzac Day a while ago, I talked about Major Chris Kebble, who was a major in the British Army, the Battle of Goose Green in the Falklands, and his commanding officer was killed. And this is 1982, and he's like, what do I do? He's a person of faith. He literally went behind a burning bush, behind a burning gorse bush, spent a few minutes down praying, got a cunning plan, okay, which would have been of God, went and won this battle. David and Goliath, his 300 men defeated 2,000 Argentines. Is that not a David and Goliath situation? To this day, Israel, they've just got a new missile defense system, said to be the most advanced missile defense system in the world. It's called David's Sling. Priority. This was not about David. This was about God's honor and his promises. He will come good with his promises. It may take a while, but he will come good with them. I've told that, it's a bit cringy really. Don't want you to get any ideas, Hannah, but I've told the story about Juliet and, is she the wife for me? I prayed when I was 18 about, Lord, how am I going to know who the right girl for me is? And it's like, and it was of me, it's like, maybe I need a sign. It's like, well, I don't want to do the whole camel and water thing, so chocolate cake. The girl that makes me a chocolate cake is the girl that I'm going to marry. And how many years later was it? It was a few years later anyway. Yeah, 15, 16 years later. So second date, she comes out with this chocolate cake. My mouth drops, and it's like, and she's like, it's only a cake. And it's like, yeah, I didn't tell her there and then that she's going to marry me, because that would have been, don't try that, anyone. That really is creepy. But anyway, But God fulfills his promises, not on our timeline though. And persistence. Not yet does not mean no. You know, if we're praying for a breakthrough, we need to keep at it. And we don't know what God's plan is in the big scheme of things. And sometimes we go through things that aren't nice. But not yet does not mean no. We need to keep going. We need to be persistent. Another thing with David, which is really interesting, which the whole slingshot thing, I was thinking, if slingshots are so effective, why didn't everyone use them? There's a very good reason. They're really, really hard to master. Okay, so I saw one of these YouTube. This guy had been practicing this every day for a year. He reckoned he'd done 30,000 shots, and he reckons he was a beginner. Only someone, he said, you have to basically be indigenous. So you have to start it from a very young age and practice every day. You know, God needed to put David through all these things. A shepherd. Why was he a shepherd? Probably no one other than a shepherd would have had time to practice his slingshot. Yeah. So, God had to put David through all those things in order to prepare him for that. So we do not serve a God that is great. We do not serve a God of the great. We serve a God of the impossible. So another thing I just think from faith, we need to lift our expectations. We serve a God of the impossible. Well, to be correct, it's of that doesn't seem possible to us. Okay? In all things, we actually need to raise our expectation, not of a God of the great, but of a God of the impossible. And an interesting thing is, when we're facing giants, maybe it's just me, but it's usually, Lord, how can I fix this? Well, actually, it should be, Lord, how are you going to fix this? Okay? It's not us that are going to do it. We have to do things, because that's another. David still got out there. David wasn't just praying and like, this Philistine's going to drop dead. Yeah, David actually still had to go out there and put some skin in the game. But, we need to be praying that how is God going to fix this in our lives? So anyway, I think that's my 25 minutes, I think. So, a bit longer than that, actually. But anyway, I'm going to close in prayer. But I'd really like to encourage you over the coming week. If you want to come up for prayer, please feel free to come up. We have a God that can slay giants. And there are all sorts of giants in our lives, okay? And they come and go. But a giant is anything that is stopping us from fulfilling the purpose that God has in our lives. So I'll just close in prayer. Just really hope everyone has a fantastic long weekend. People were asking me as a principal, you're going to have a nice break. It's like, I'm not really having a break over the weekend, but it's been a real pleasure to be able to speak today. And as a pastor's son, they often get the dud preachers to preach on the holiday weekends when there's no one around. So hopefully they'll ask me to preach again, and it won't just be the New Year's one when everyone's away. But anyway, okay. Lord, I just really pray a real blessing upon our whole community at MCC in Masterton. Lord, I just really pray that we'll be a people of faith, Lord, a people of power, Lord, a people that are willing to tap into everything that you have for us, Lord, that we won't just expect the good, we won't just expect the great, but we will expect the impossible. And Lord, everything is possible with you. So Lord, I just really pray that you'll lift our expectation and our faith. And I just really lift up those who are facing giants today, Lord. I just really pray that you'll help them to remember the times that you've been faithful in the past. I really just pray that you just help them to set time aside, that you'll really guide them with attacking that situation, Lord. In Jesus' name, Lord. May you be the priority in their life, Lord. Give them a passion, Lord. And I just really pray that those walls will tumble, Lord. Those giants will fall, because anything that is bigger than us is not bigger than you. In Jesus' name, amen.